Good morning, I'm Joe, and I'm a recovering workaholic. And you're supposed to say, "Hi, Joe." Yeah, not enough of you have been to 12-step meetings, which is a good thing, I think, right now. I come from a long line of workaholics. My dad, Dutch Mennonite farmer, then became an architect and builder, worked hard. I'd watched him my whole life, work 60, 70-hour weeks, and then he'd come home and to relax, he'd work another 20. And I always saw him working. And I learned a lot from him and was an early endorser of my addiction. Had it in high school, and then it started to really grow in college. But the arena where I really was best at my addiction was 40 years in the church. For 40 years, I was a pastor. And I'm telling you, it is the world of expectations. So first of all, I knew I needed to live up to the expectations that God had for me. So I tried to find out what those were and do those. But then, added to that were the expectations that I had of me, with my dad looking over my shoulder. And then, I had the expectations of all the people that were in my churches, guessing what they expected of me, and then trying to do that. Found out most of that was an illusion, by the way, afterwards, later on. But nonetheless, all those expectations, you really, really get worn down. And then, wouldn't you know it, but I worked for a long line of serial workaholics. In fact, in my years of being in the church as a pastor, and really, I think all my years in the church as a pastor, I've never seen a pastor model rest. I've never seen anybody do it. In fact, I have never heard a single sermon that I remember about rest. I've never seen anybody value rest. Plus, I'm an American, right? I mean, we know how to work. But occasionally I'd hear one of those pastors teach on the Ten Commandments. And how many of you still think that the Ten Commandments are valid for the Christ follower today? The Ten Commandments, how many of you think then how come you only live by 9? How come I've only ever heard of 9? I haven't even heard of the 10th. What is it? Do you know what it is? To take the Sabbath and keep it holy. In fact, in Exodus 20, and wasn't just a day, it was a concept of rest, of taking a breath. In Exodus 20, when the Ten Commandments are written out, more words are given to that commandment than all of the others. God put more emphasis on that commandment than all others, and I've never heard about it. In fact, the Sabbath was the day I worked 14 hours a lot of times. So I kept grinding out, doing the 9 commandments, and I'd find myself at times just really bone weary. And then Patty and I would look at our peers. We started ministry in our 20s, and we had a bunch of friends that were in ministry, youth worship guys, different churches within our denomination. We became really close friends. And over that next decade, we were amazed to see how many of them, a decade later, weren't in ministry. Their marriages had failed. Their ministries had gone, that they had struggled and had been removed or it had fallen apart. We watched families struggle. Nobody told me how dangerous it was to be a shepherd. In fact, it's kind of romantic, right? Wouldn't you all like to be a pastor? You really only work one really long day a week, and then you hang out with people and pray and eat a lot, right? And it's an easy gig until you do it. I mean, somebody said everybody loves sausage until they work in a sausage factory. And ministry is a lot like that. And so what we started to notice is that our friends weren't making it for the long haul. And we didn't know what to do about that. Then right in the middle of that, I got to tell you, there were certain times that I did see and hear God's words, but I honestly didn't understand them. I'd like you to look at this passage. I heard it preached on before. It's in Matthew 11. So you got your Bibles. Turn Matthew 11 and verse 28. And I guarantee you've all heard it. I've heard it. I just didn't have a clue what it meant. And here's what Jesus was saying in Matthew 11:28. He's looking at his disciples, and he says, and to the people that were with them, and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you what? And then he goes on and says, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find what? Rest for your souls. Kind of cynical. What I tend to heard over the years is, come unto me, you pastors, you people who are fried and burned out and stuff, and I'll give you a weekend seminar on rest, in which you'll fill out a workbook and have 2 hours of free time on Saturday. That's kind of the American version of teaching on rest. Then I dug deeper into this, and really, honestly, it's only been in the last years that I finally understood what this verse meant to me for the first time. First of all, I like what it says in the King James Version, which catches it a little bit more like the original language. It says, Jesus said, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden. First, I want to make it real clear. God made it clear back in the garden, we were designed and created to work. We do labor. We know about it. It's part of us. It's a good thing. God made it, and He purposed us for labor. But the next word is something different altogether. Come to me, all you who labor and who are heavy laden. Heavy laden. Maybe you've never thought about it, but I think that probably describes a lot of your life and being an American. Heavy laden means this. Excuse me. In the ancient world at Jesus' time, so many of the workers were agrarian. They grew stuff and then they brought it to the city. And honestly, not that many people had oxen or donkeys or things to pull that with. The vast majority of farmers who brought their wares to be sold, you know what they did? They put them on a hand cart. They pulled a cart, had a couple of wheels, and the vast majority of goods that were hauled in that day were hauled on one of those. So you designed it, you balanced it out, and you knew 200 pounds was really your limit. That you could get back and forth with 200 pounds and you'd be okay. That's to labor. But you know what would happen? Just like with us, you'd go, yeah, but I think I can do 300. If I do 300, I think I can make, my profit margin will increase. So you'd start doing 300, and it's hard. It's heavy laden. You can still pull it, but it's costing you something now. And then you realize, I've gotten used to 300. I'm pretty sure I can push 350. And all of a sudden, you see where this is going? It's the kind of weariness that coming home and sleeping doesn't fix for the next day. Some of you are in this right now. Some of you have had chapters of your life that you know what I'm talking about. It's that heavy laden. And so what does God offer here? When it says heavy laden there, it really means bone-tired, weary. Americans actually pride themselves in this condition. Do you know that almost a third of all American workers, from 7-Eleven employees to CEOs, when they interview them, almost a third of Americans don't use their vacation each year. They don't use all of it. Even if they only get a week, even if they only get 2 weeks, they don't use it all. You know why? Because somehow we're validated by being busy. Somehow we think if we don't put out like the other guys who don't take their vacation, then we're not showing our value as a worker. And so we just grind it out. Part of this is because of our rugged individualism as Americans. We want to show people we are about to get, or right on the cusp of getting, the American dream. Look at me. People ask you how you doing. You're going, oh, I'm doing good, just busy. But that means I'm not slacking. I'm doing the work, and I'm of value. Interestingly enough, that Jesus looks right at those people who have heard so many times in America that it's better to burn out than to rust out. He looks right at them and he offers something that no one has ever offered them. Rest. The first time he says rest, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The first time he says it, it's a verb. It's a verb, and it means literally to stop, to crash. Not like run into something. Our version of crash, just down, and get a chance to recover. And this is something that sometimes we do, but it's usually when we've run out of all else that we'll stop and we'll crash. So the one is that we're to stop, it's a verb, we're to stop and to crash. The second verb is in 29, it says, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. This time it's a noun. And the noun that best translates into English is intermission. I will give you intermission. I will give you halftime. How many of you have played sports in any way that has a halftime in it? Any organized, okay? So you know what I'm talking about. You give it all in the first half because there is in your mind this promise of something coming, isn't there? What is it? It's halftime. It's halftime. I played football in high school, and my first couple of years especially, I played offense and defense and was on all the special teams. And it was crazy. And so what would happen, because there probably weren't enough players and stuff, so what would happen is we would look forward to, your brain would just say, keep going, because halftime's coming. And then when halftime came, we went up to the locker room, and I'm telling you what, everybody went down. They went onto the floor, leaning back against lockers. Some of them got the benches. You see what I'm saying? You go down. And the purpose is to, the first verb, to stop, to crash, and to recover. So he says, I want you to stop, crash, and recover, and I'm going to give you halftime to look forward to so you get some of that. Maybe in modern lingo, it might be margin. God wants to give margin in your life where you can recoup. Because you know what? When you get back onto the field for the third quarter, and it's fourth quarter, and you got almost nothing left, you know what keeps you going? This game will soon be over, and I'll get to rest again. So rest becomes this powerful motivator. It gets us to halftime. It lets us stop, crash, and recover. And then it gets us to the end of the game where we get to crash, rest, and recover again before we start all over. That's what God is offering here, and I missed it. He made us to work hard, but nobody ever told me that He made us to rest hard. We were meant to work hard and to look forward to and know that we were going to be getting rest. We're going to rest hard. Somehow, collectively as a people, we have lost an important piece of information that nobody's passed on to us. It's like this. We walk and walk and walk, and then somebody says, hey, I got a great gift for you. It's called a car. And you push this pedal, and it goes. But collectively, somehow, nobody ever says anything about that other pedal. Like, we don't even know what it's for, so we never use it. We don't have a manual. And so what do? We go and go. We go until we usually crash and burn. You hear what I'm saying here? God's saying, I made you to go hard. And then I gave you that pedal to rest, to stop, and to slow down. God didn't make us to be human doings. He made us to be human beings. And even how He set up for the Jews, how a day worked, is so radically different than us. He taught the Jewish people from the very beginning of their collective as a people of when the day started. Do you know when the day started for Jewish people? And still does? When is it? Sundown. Sundown. The day starts at sundown. So you know what your day starts with? It starts with a meal. It starts with your family. It starts with a fire, maybe a book. It's rest, it's community. And then you go to sleep. And then when you wake up, the last part of your day is you labor. So that you can look forward to the sun going down and you get to rest. Do you see what we've done? You see what I'm doing here? This is what we've done. And that's why so few people in America sleep the numbers that they are supposed to. I see stories all the time, don't you? About impact of sleep deprivation on high schoolers, college students, and then adults. Because the last thing we fit in, the last thing that we try to squeeze in, if we can, is a few hours of sleep. Well, this way of thinking really takes a toll on all of us, but I'll tell you, it really takes a toll on shepherds. Because shepherds, they spend their life, I really believe, for the vast majority of their motivation is right and righteous, to honor God, to serve people. But what happens is they get caught up with this American thing and nobody tells them there's a brake pedal. And what happens is they start breaking down. They go so hard that they finally start to crash. And so years ago, as I told you, we saw this pattern happening in our friends. Very few people were finishing ministry. They just weren't going to the end. And we thought, what could we do? Could there be something that, this is my wife Patty right down here in the front, we would dream, we'd say, is there something we could do? I don't know what it is, to help people like us stay in the game. And for a lot of time we thought it was going to be like a retreat center where people could come. But as soon as I started the process of thinking, well, then I'd have to buy property, raise money, and hire staff. No, that dream's done. That was nowhere in my list of things I wanted to do. So we still hung on to this dream, and then about 9 years ago, God created a chapter change in our life in which we could come back and say, if we could do anything in the world now, what would it be? And we came back to this dream. And this dream, it's the craziest thing. It's turned into something called shepherd's care. Shepherd's care brings really weary, broken and stressed and distressed pastors, missionaries, nonprofit leaders that are faith-based from all over the country, all over the world. And they come to the Hilton Head area for 1 week. And people give us empty houses, villas, vacation rentals, gorgeous places. And we fill them with their favorite foods, gifts galore, fresh flowers, a whole envelope of things that people in the community have given for them to do, golf, dolphins, restaurants. And we say, you have to follow the example that God gave us through Elijah. Elijah became our poster child for shepherd's care, because when we thought about this dream, we didn't know what it would look like. We're not really counselors. We're not fix-it people, really. And so we thought, well, then what could we do? Then we saw in 1 Kings the story of Elijah. Elijah, Hall of Fame. First vote, he made it in right away. They didn't even vote. He just went straight into the Hall of Fame. In fact, when we pick him up in this story, he's just been the MVP of the Super Bowl. Killed 450 prophets of Baal, fire from the sky. You know the story, right? The whole deal. Within 2 weeks of that happening, you find Elijah looking at God in person, saying, kill me, I'm done. I quit. I've had it. He was so empty. And it wasn't from a bunch of bad stuff. It was really, honestly, too much good stuff that had been going on, right? So you go, oh man, when you say that to God to his face, what happens next? Well, it's really interesting what happened next. God didn't try to fix him. He didn't talk to him. He did nothing. He took him out in the middle of nowhere, put him under this huge shade tree, and Elijah went hard to sleep. And it says that an angel had to shake him hard to wake him up to see that he had just cooked a buffet. And Elijah ate as much as he could eat. I'm telling you, when an angel's cooking food, that's some serious food. He ate all he could eat, went back to sleep. It says, again, he was so exhausted, the angel shook him awake. Another round of food. We're not told how many days, but it lasted for days. 2 things: eating, sleeping. And at the end of a period of time, it says that his spirit was strengthened. He got up and he continued his journey. And you know what the next place on the journey was? That was Mount Horeb. That's where God spoke to him in the still, quiet voice. Patty and I looked at each other in our kitchen, thinking about what could we do, and we realized we can do sleep and food. We are good at that. We are good. Her hospitality gifts are incredible. My ability to eat is incredible. And I just thought it was a perfect match. And so we thought, what if we just brought people here and gave them what we never got? In all the years that we did ministry, nobody ever gave us guilt-free rest, ever. I got a sabbatical once, but I had to give a whole report when the sabbatical was over, what I learned, what I read. Right? So we started saying, what could we give? And what that's turned into is a week of time where we love on them on the front end and on the back end and only in the middle if they want. And we give them 2 things that they need to do a day. We tell them, your job description for the next week is to say, do I eat again or do I sleep again? I'll tell you now, we've been doing this. Next month will be 7 years. And we are still stunned. We were stunned yesterday when a couple from a mega church got their first rest ever, came here, and we have them all shapes and sizes, all colors, all demographics, but they said never in their lives had they had a week where all they had to do was just be with God and be with each other. And what we're seeing, the results in a week, are beyond what we would have ever imagined 7 years ago when we started. And so because we know a little bit more now than we did at the beginning, I'm going to share with you just a passage of Scripture that we share with them on the first night that we meet with them. And we felt like it's really important that we learned this, because what would happen is we'd get people that would come and they'd say, oh, thank you, we need a week. And oftentimes we'd hear them say something like, we really got to figure out what our next thing in ministry is. So we need this time. I had pastors say, I really need to work on sermon prep. Like, I got to know what the next series is going to be. And our hearts would just die a little because we'd go, no, that's not what we wanted for you, but we weren't going to tell them what they could do or not do. So then God revealed this passage to us, and it became our theme passage. And you guys know it. It's in Psalm 46. It's on Psalm 46:10. And I guarantee everybody here has heard the first line of this passage. And it is, be still and know that I'm God. How many of you have heard that before? Raise your hands. 100%. You can find it at Hobby Lobby. Patty brought one. You know what it says? Be still and know. And it stops there. It leaves out the God part, right? But it still sounded good to somebody to market that. Be still and know that I'm God. I've heard this before, but I never understood it before. So I looked a lot more closely at this passage, and starting with that first part, here's what I found. Be still. The word still means to stop and drop. Stop and drop, or withdraw. Means to, it's that, some versions say cease striving. It's the same exact, how many of you have ever had or are around occasionally a 3-year-old? Let me see your hands. They don't know how to stop, right? They just are bouncing like a neutron, just ping, 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 ping. And you want to just say, be still. That's what God is saying to us, like 3-year-olds. He's saying, stop and drop. The other half of this word that I love, which you would never have known had I not gone into Strong's and gone back to the origin of the word. The verb is used, and we are commanded to be slothful. To be slothful. How many of you have ever been given a compliment about being a sloth? No. What God is saying, He says, I don't want you to die. I just want you to slow down to, well, what's that movie that the DMV agent is a sloth? You ever seen that? And the guy's in a hurry, right? And he goes and it just drives him crazy. God is saying, slow it down. Be like a sloth. Nobody has ever told me this before. And if I slow down, if I stop and drop, The other example here that's really clear to me in this word still, I would say it's clearest to me from backpacking. Now, if y'all from the South, you don't even know probably what a mountain is. But how many of you have backpacked before? Anybody in here? Just a handful of you. So here's what the deal is. It's supposed to be fun. You put on a pack, and you put about 40, 45 pounds in it, and then you look at the trail map, and it says, we only got 6 miles the first day. And 11% grade, that's nothing, right? Until you start going, and it turns into a death march. And you're just, I'm not kidding you, you get to a point where you're just going, put that foot, and you're just waiting for somebody in your group to say, hey, why don't we take a break? You just know it can't be you because you'll be the wuss, right? Finally, somebody says, let's stop. And I'm telling you, I've seen this before, I've experienced it many times. I stop, I drop. I don't even take the pack off. I find a rock or a tree, I'm down and I'm leaning back against it. And I'm digging for a canteen. That is what God is calling us to do. To stop and drop, and then in that position, here's the next thing He wants us to do. He wants us to know that He is God. Know that He is God. That means to recognize or admit or acknowledge, confess. I like the last word best, consider. To stop and go, oh. I think what happens in ministry, and this happens in life, it happens for you too, is that we're going through life and we're doing what we know God wants us to do, but we're in such a busy time doing it, we'll hardly ever look at Him. We know He's there, we'll catch a glance every now and then, but we don't really know what His face looks like. You know what this is telling us? Is that if we stop and drop and just look in God's face, it'll start to come into focus again and we'll go, oh wow, He is rocking. That's an awesome beard. I mean, that's amazing. And then we look and go, oh, look at all of those laugh lines on His face. They're not frown lines. And I never knew He had that little thing growing right here, right? You look at His face and you go, oh, I see you again. And then look at what happens in the next verses. It says, be still and know that I'm God, and you will know this. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted among the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Here's what happens. When we stop and look at Him, you know what we find out? He is way bigger than we thought. It's like we go, oh my goodness, He's huge. He's kind of scary huge. He's amazing huge. He holds the universe in the palm of His hand. Are you kidding me? The earth exalts Him. The people exalt Him. He's amazing. And then the second thing we see in that next verse is it says, the Lord of hosts is with us. The whole time we've been running, we didn't realize He's bigger than we thought. He's with us. And then the third part says that He's like a refuge to us. That's an impenetrable fort we can run into and nothing can get us. Nothing. So when we stop and drop, turn our face, look at His face, we'll realize He's more awesome and amazing than we thought. He's with me right now and He's got me. And all of a sudden, everything starts to change. And then at the end of that passage, which I've seen countless times before in my life, is the word Selah. Selah. If you'll go to that slide, it literally means, in English, to pause and calmly think about that. Isn't that a good word? Very un-American, by the way. Pause and calmly think about that. I want you to walk away with this today. If I say Selah, you say... Okay, I want to do this again, okay? Because when you hear Selah, you say... Man, it's a good word. It's a good word. It's something that I honestly have not practiced nearly as I should have over my lifetime. And so because I saw this word in a new light, I went deeper. And again, I could push a button on my laptop, and it took me to the Strong's Concordance, and it told me the original meaning of the word. And you know what I found out? All along, the word literally is a musical term. It's a term that any musician and any worship leader would have known. That was singing the Psalms. Because remember, the Psalms are just songs. And this, how many of you read music at all? Okay? Just a few of you. Well, you know what a whole rest is. It doesn't matter what country you're in or what language you're in. When you see a whole rest, you know what it means. Well, when anyone saw the word Selah, they knew what it meant. It meant this. They're singing. The band is playing. There's singers up in the front. When they see the word Selah, the worship leader, Jacob, would look over at the singers, and he'd cut them off. And then he'd tell the band, keep playing. Then he would turn to the congregation and he'd say, you know those words, that passage we just sang? I want you to pause. I want you to calmly think about what you just sang. You've sung it so many times that it stopped even meaning anything. Amazing Grace? When was the last time that touched your heart? Pause and calmly think about that. Isn't that a great word? It's one that I want you to ponder and think about when you, beyond today. At what point do you stop, drop, look at God in the face, and calmly think about that? So, because this was a new favorite word, I started looking for it in different translations and reading these verses in different. I came to one translation that turned out that it was the New English translation. It was the only one I've ever seen. That every time the word Selah is mentioned, it's in parentheses. And my mind, probably like yours, just immediately went with, why the parentheses? And then it hit me. I don't think you can have Selah without parentheses. Let me explain that to you. This is a concept that we really try to ask our guests to consider on that first night that we meet with them, as they come with all kinds of expectations of what they're going to do with the week. We walk through this with them and we say, I want to throw an idea at you. You do with it what you want. This isn't a thus saith the Lord for you. This is a suggestion. I'd like you to consider Selah for a week. But the only way it'll work is with parentheses. So here's what I'd like to ask you to consider doing. I'd like the first parentheses to start this morning right before you woke up. Right before you woke up. That's the first parentheses. And that parentheses is massive. It's unscalable this way, and it goes infinitely this way. And it's blocking you from everything that's happened in the past. Because I don't know if you're like me, but when I try to get quiet with God, and I try to be in His presence, and I try to slow down and really listen, you know what clutters up my mind? Thoughts from the past. And I'm going, I wished I would have said this. I wished I wouldn't have done this. Why did I can't believe they did this to me. And all of a sudden I'm back there and I'm missing what God was wanting. So if you could put a parenthesis here, keep the past on the other side. The problem with the past is in our minds, it's still ultra high def 16K clarity. It looks like it's still happening, but it's an illusion. It's harder than granite. It's frozen. But what do I do late at night when I'm trying to sleep? I pull out a little rusty ice pick and I go back in the past and I try to chisel it, reshape it, get rid of those words that I said. Or you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You're trying to refashion. It's futile. It's frozen. So leave that there. Leave it on the other side of that parentheses. The other parentheses, you know where this one's going. I said it starts the morning you wake up after you're back home again. And it's same thing. Can't scale it, can't travel from end to end. Leave the future on the other side of that parentheses, because sociologists have proven when mankind in general looks at the past, they see regret and condemnation are the two main things that we think of with the past. But the future brings anxiety and fear. Now, there's a lot of hope there. There's good stuff there. We hope that, fill in the blank. But man, there could be bad stuff coming. And God wants us to take time where we put something there, and we put something there, and we spend time with Him there. Now, this isn't rocket science, but I know all of you want to experience more of what it's like to be in God's presence. In His presence. We sang it in the song, in your presence, Lord. But here's the crazy thing. The only place we can experience His presence is in the present. It's right now in that moment. But if our minds are there, or our minds are there, do you see what's going on? Jesus is here going, hey, when you're ready, I'd really love to be in your presence. So this becomes a new discipline. I mean, we all know in Corinthians where it says that we're to take captive our thoughts, the bad ones, and ask God to take them. I believe that you can pray, and I do, Lord, because they aren't all bad thoughts, but just, Lord, anything that's from there or there, when I'm with you, could you take those? Could you capture those and get rid of them for me? Because I want to experience your presence. How would any of this fit into real life? How does rest and Selah fit into your life? I don't have an answer for you for that. But the Lord does. And you know what it'll come from? Where it'll come from? It'll come from times where you calmly think about that. Where you pause and calmly think about that. Could it show up in your calendar? Could there be a day periodically that just on your calendar would say Selah? And you get away with a lunch, a lawn chair, a book you want to read in the Bible, and just go and be alone and enjoy God's presence. Could it be a friend of mine lives in Atlanta and is involved with a very powerful but very high-stress ministry that works with racial reconciliation on the streets in Atlanta. These have been tough years for them. It's been, as you know, Atlanta's been a hotbed. And in the national news, especially back 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was right after the time that the burnings and the shootings had happened in Atlanta that they came as guests to Shepherd's Care. And this whole idea of Selah and rest was completely foreign to him and his wife. And since they've come and gone, we've stayed in touch and become great friends. And I was calling him about 4 or 5 months ago, and he didn't answer the phone, which is not that unusual because he's busy. But about 10 minutes later, I got a call from him. And he said, sorry I didn't answer the phone. He said, but what I was doing, interestingly enough, when you called, is I had just set a 5-minute timer on my phone. And I was in the car before I'm going to get out onto Atlanta traffic, and I set the timer for 5 minutes and said, Lord, I just want to have a 5-minute Selah with you. I don't want to think about the day or what's coming. I just want to be with you for 5 minutes. And I'm going, dude, that guy's, he's figuring it out. You can place parentheses around any time, and make it very consciously a time where you pause. What's the rest? Let's try that again. If I say Selah, you say, so that's how we're going to end the service. I have no idea what you've heard this morning. I barely even know what I said. If God was saying anything to you, you're going to have to pick it up right now. What is He showing you about rest in your life? Do you have half times? Do you even look forward to a half time? Did you know God made you to rest? And He made you to work. And He wants you to do both with all your might. Did you know that He wants you to look deeply into His face? So we're going to spend a few minutes. We're not in a hurry. Don't get uncomfortable with the quiet as Jake just plays a little bit. I want you to take a Selah right now. I want you to crawl inside the parentheses and sit with Jesus and find out what He has to say for you this morning about what you're to do with whatever it is that He said to you this morning, okay? And then I'll come up and pray in a little while. Take your time.